when Tolstoy sort of said like why art is sort of becoming a lie, what was the actual like critique of art and the critique of beauty?
Yeah, so for him, he was talking about how art had become, well, there's a couple different ways. I mean, for him, he thinks that art only counts if there's a real feeling. So if you're transmitting through your art some kind of feeling, so maybe it's happiness, maybe it's sadness, maybe it's sorrow, are you kind of giving that ability to experience to the other person? It could be a painting, it could be a video, it could be a piece of writing, and it has to be intentional. So the artist has to mean what they create. So you don't, create a painting that you don't feel. You just create it for example, just to make some money. He would say that's not art. And he kind of talks about that critique and how a lot of the art during that time had become kind of for the wealthy, for the 1%. Art became this kind of pretentious thing that only the elite had. So the emotions are a really big part. If the person that's viewing your art doesn't feel something, then he also doesn't think that's art. So if any of those three kind of necessary components aren't present in that art piece, whatever that art is, he would say that's not art, or that's like bad art. So that's where he was critiquing, and where he thought most of the art was kind of like a copy of a copy of a copy, which is kind of funny because it kind of relates to Plato later on in the Republic. He talks about how he wants to exile all the poets, which is kind of ironic because he started before philosophy. He was a poet. He destroyed all his poetry, and then he became into philosophy. But he says he wants to, when you're creating this, I think he calls it Calipolis, which is in Greek, which is kind of like a utopian city. He wants to banish all the poetry because he sees poetry as kind of a copy of a copy of a copy of the highest good. So art is kind of like 3 layers removed from what the highest good is. So, the absolute version of justice. Paintings or poetry would be like 3 layers removed. So you have to banish them and kind of start from scratch. What's the highest good and go from there. So it's kind of interesting how there's even like Plato kind of related into art with Leo Tolstoy as well.
Yeah, I think that point on art and creativity is so beautiful and quite hard to sort of replicate in life, but feels so just right in my soul, And I read Rick Rubin's The Creative Act, and this idea in that book that the purpose of art is for an artist to try and translate a ineffable experience they have inside themselves that language just wouldn't do justice to. And whether that's a great feeling of love, or these highest goods that these philosophers talk about, like justice and being moral and being and experiencing eudaimonia and sort of the peak human experience. And even it can go from that, I guess, to the other end of the spectrum, to the real darkness of the human experience. Art is a kind of the best translation we have of those things. But as soon as somebody just tries to make art that looks like other people's art, it doesn't have that life behind it. It's dead. It's like a human corpse that's freshly deceased. It's like it looks like a human being, but there's nobody there. There's no soul behind it. And I think it's a very hard thing to create authentically and not be influenced by what other people's opinions of what you're doing is going to be, and just go from that raw source. But to believe that raw source even exists, you have to have some kind of like spiritual, metaphysical element to it. But I think that makes sense to me that that's what art is. And that's why art moves us so much, because it's not reading in the sense like you'd read a sentence in a book and know what it means. You're reading someone's internal world.
Yeah, for sure. But, and, to relate to that, I saw a video once, and I think what makes Leo Tolstoy's kind of ideas or components of what art really is, I think even harder in today's world, is because I saw a video and someone said, everyone's an artist until rent is due, which is really interesting because it's intrinsically very difficult to pursue true art when there's so many components making it very hard to do so. Especially in today's society. I mean, like you have to make money in some way. And unfortunately, the arts and a lot of these things we're talking about, there's not really a lot of incentive. And actually, it's much more difficult to create a career or to even make money off of it. And inherently making money off of it also strays away from the core message of art. So it's kind of like you're in a catch-22. Like you want to create art, but you also need to pay bills, but paying bills also kind of deviates from true art. So you're kind of stuck in like, you don't really know what to do. So I think this makes it even more difficult in the modern world as well.
Yeah. When you said that that quote, it reminded me of, it's basically the same thing, but in different words. Chris Rock saying, follow your dreams if they're hiring. Is this kind of conflict between the craftsman and the artist, the craftsman making this thing so that people, when they know they're like, and the artist making something novel that's original. And I feel like the solution, we have to integrate them, whatever that kind of means, because you have to keep the soul. When you're a copy of a copy of a copy, you lose the soul so much that it almost doesn't work. And so that's probably the problem with like, in this context, doing a podcast, like purely following the algorithm. But then you also need you need the art part. But if you have just pure art with no kind of craftsmanship, then it's back to the two extremes, isn't it? And finding the middle part. And I think the last thing I'd add is we were talking about beauty a lot and kind of defining beauty, and it's like, I was thinking of it in like a context, because I think, Joel, you mentioned about sort of something, I can't remember what you said a couple of minutes ago, but it was something about like humans, the soul or something. And I guess I was thinking about beauty isn't just so for this context, sort of like if you see like a good, attractive woman, the beauty isn't necessarily the aesthetics, it's the feeling that potentially, like if you see a good looking woman, she's wearing these things that give off a feeling. I don't think the actual, like, just the aesthetics of that lady is potentially enough. I think we need that feeling, and potentially the feeling comes from the integration of the art and the craftsmanship. Maybe yeah, that's my thoughts.
Do you mean like the beauty is found in like the depth that it can only be kind of found deep within the beholder type thing? That's why just basing something on aesthetics, it's not beautiful. I don't know. You could get ChatGPT to give you, like, I don't know, generate me an image of the most beautiful man or woman you can, or generate me an image of the most beautiful flower or the most beautiful landscape you possibly can. But it wouldn't be actually beautiful. It would just be aesthetically nice. I mean, do you guys kind of get what I'm trying to say? That there's like a depth element where it can't just be like an idea of being beautiful. There has to be something raw and a bit rough around the edges about it, and it has to be something very human and very real, that then something can be said as beautiful.